Hello and welcome back to Exodus 17's Outreach Masterclass. Outreach is all about connecting God with people. But which people? You may already know that you should or even want to share your faith with someone, but not just anyone. Maybe you can think of some people who are so good at outreach that they can just share their faith with just about anyone. But is there a someone that it would be best and most effective to talk to? Or maybe a better question is there someone that God would want me to talk to? Today, we're going to be talking about how and where to find the next person you can reach out to. In Acts 16, Paul and Silas were thrown in prison, but God freed them with a violent earthquake that broke their chains and opened the prison doors. The jailer was going to take his own life because he thought that he had lost his prisoners, but Paul stopped him, and the prison guard, seeing the miracle, said, "What must I do to be saved?" Acts 16, 31 through 34. They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and all the others in his house. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his household were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole household. Did you notice how many times he said he and his whole household? It's pretty clear that God doesn't just have individuals in mind for salvation, but households. He doesn't just want you to be saved, but you and your whole household. In the Western world, we're incredibly individualistic and don't think the way that the original audience of the Bible did. The assumption is that the first people that we would want to be and work to get saved is our whole household. They come first in priority and sequence. There are lots of examples of times when God uses one person to deliver the people close to him or her. In Genesis 6, 17 through 18, God uses Noah to deliver his family and therefore humanity. In Joshua 6, 17 through 25, God uses Rahab to deliver her family and spare Israelite lives. In Acts 10, 24 through 46, God uses Cornelius to deliver his friends and family. In Acts 16, 14 through 15, God uses Lydia to deliver her household as well. Again and again, God doesn't just save one individual, but he saves and uses that individual to save his or her family and friends. That means that God has placed you where you are, primarily to reach the people that you know. It is God's will for you to be extremely diligent about reaching out to your family and friends. This is a tool called a household map. What you do is you put your name in the middle circle and then the names of people in your household. I'll bet you can name a few people right now. The goal of this tool is to expand this map to multiple generations. You can use this household map to not only include family members, but friends and acquaintances. The goal is to not only think about the people who are closest to you, but to think about the people who are close to the people close to you, because they're the next generation of disciples. Just like everything else in this masterclass, you will get out of this tool whatever you put into it. The more time you spend with this map, the more it will develop and the more useful it will become to you. Here's the big question though. What would it look like to be responsible with these relationships? We'll talk about next steps with the next person next time. But for now, we're discovering who's next. Jesus already has them in mind. In John 17, Jesus prayed for his disciples, but he said in verse 20, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message." So Jesus was praying for you because you believed in him, because of the message of other disciples. But this also means that Jesus was praying for those who will believe in him because of your message, which means that he knows who and cares about who's next for you, and it's probably somebody you're already connected with. But what if most of the people in our immediate household are already Christ followers, or you've already shared your faith with them, and they've expressed that they are not interested? Then the next step is not necessarily to start reaching out to complete strangers, but to get deeper in relationship with people who you're already acquainted with. Sure, there are plenty of examples in the Bible of times when someone shared their faith with a complete stranger. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's a great thing to do. Like in those examples, we know that God led us to that person for that purpose. But in everyday life, a good principle to remember is that life transformation happens in the context of relationship. That means that the likelihood of someone making a significant personal change has a direct correlation to the degree that they know and trust the person who's suggesting the change. Practically, this means that we have to make the margin and not at the expense of our other priorities like family and church, to get to be friends with non-Christians. If we're asking how we can share our faith with people that we don't know, we're asking the wrong question. Ask instead how you can get to know more non-Christians. Of the preferred partners for a spiritual conversation, people would much prefer to have that conversation with a friend over anyone else. And 9 out of 10, 88%, who have had life-changing spiritual conversations say that they've had it with someone that they knew well or very well. So, incredibly fruitful disciple makers are very intentional about getting deeper in a relationship with non-Christians. A lot of people think of evangelism as me telling a stranger about God's plan for them, and them saying yes, and now they're a Christian. But it doesn't have to be a stranger. In fact, it's better if it's not a stranger. For example, do you know anyone who asked someone to marry them without barely knowing them? They just met them, fell in love, and asked them to marry them. That is quite a commitment. Sometimes people have a matchmaker help set them up to meet their spouse, but for someone to meet someone, ask them to commit to them for the rest of their lives, that hardly ever happens. I witnessed this on a recent trip to Nicaragua to train pastors and leaders. Seated in front of me on the plane was a native Nicaraguan lady who had an American man next to her who she had never met. Even though they didn't speak the same language, they hit it off immediately, which I know because they were using Google Translate to talk to each other and everyone awkwardly heard their conversation. Things escalated really quickly to where these two were talking about spending time together when they arrived at their destination, and the lady was talking about how she was looking for a long-term committed relationship, and he was like, "Oh, okay." And then she was like, "But you should meet my parents first while you're there," and was showing him family pictures, and he was like, "Oh, okay." And she was like, "Oh, and this is my daughter. She's really gonna like you. Oh. Do you think that he took the plunge and they got into a long-term committed relationship right there on the plane? No way. By the time they were disembarked, they weren't even talking to each other. It was super weird. In the same way, it's very unusual and not very realistic to meet a complete stranger, introduce them to Jesus, and then pop the question, do you want to commit to him for the rest of your life? And them say yes. It happens, but the most natural way to make a new disciple is to take intentional steps in relationship with people toward commitment. This is another tool called circles of influence. It's just a picture of circles with lines inside of them. Each of the circles represents your circles of influence. What would you name your circles of influence? Maybe you would label them neighborhood, work, school, social group, extended family, whatever. If you have more circles of influence than the number of circles that are on this tool, go ahead and add more. Don't leave any out. After you name your circles of influence, write the names of up to 5 people that you personally know in each. Favor the names of people you don't think are Christ followers. The purpose of this tool is to help you name people that you're around, but may not yet be in relationship with. Not to the degree that you would like to be to share your faith with, but with some intentionality, you easily could be. As you attempt to discover who's next for you to reach out to, the name of that person is very likely on this list. And your next step is to develop your relationship with this person or these people so that you can earn their trust and eventually have a meaningful relationship and conversations with them. The secret that extremely fruitful disciple makers know is that the best way to reach new people is down the lines of relationships. Sure, they can and will talk to strangers about their faith if God directs them to do so, but it is a given that God has already directed us to be responsible with those who we're in relationship with, to nudge them one step closer to Jesus. If someone is going to become a new disciple of Jesus, it's almost certainly going to be someone that you already know, or someone that someone you know knows. And that's why it's so important to create, develop, and continue stewarding your household and your circles of influence. Finally, our last tool is called the List of 100. More than the other tools, this one is going to take you some time to fill out. It's pretty straightforward though. You write out as many of your relationships as you possibly can and mark down if they're following Jesus or not, or if you don't know. If they are, great. If you don't know, your next step is to find out. And if they're not following Jesus, there's the next person you get to reach out to. It's far more effective to try and make a new disciple out of them than a complete stranger. All right, remember that evangelism is most effective when it comes from someone who knows you and loves you. And that means that the person that you should reach out to next is on one of these lists. And as these lists change and develop over time, you'll have a lifetime of people to share God's love and share your faith with. Thanks for going to work on those tools, and we'll see you next time.